In the year 1562, the Kingdom of France fell into a series of internal and religious wars that would last for the next 36 years. Tensions between the Catholics and Protestants in France had reached a breaking point, and in 1562, those tensions finally turned into a civil war. After the massacre at Vassy in March of that year, where a group of 500 Protestant parishioners were attacked while worshiping, 50 of them being killed, Protestant anger began to rise and spread throughout the country. After that, the French Protestants, who were called Huguenots, began raiding Catholic churches, tearing down saints, desecrating tombs, and looting church wealth for themselves. They were fervent iconoclasts and eagerly ransacked Catholic sites. One of the churches they raided was the Abbey of Saint Etienne in Caen, an abbey that had been founded by William the Conqueror in the 1060s and which also held his remains. Tearing through the abbey, the Huguenots turned their attention to the tomb of the Conqueror, a lavish and ornate tomb fit for a king, and they dug up his remains, stealing away any treasures along with the dead king's old bones and scattering his remains to who knows where. The story goes that some intrepid Catholic monks somehow recovered William's femur, the only piece of him that remained, and they returned the bone to the tomb with elaborate ceremony. Despite their efforts, William would not rest in peace. 230 years later, his tomb was again vandalized, and his remains were again distributed, this time during the French Revolution. Again, apparently his remains, or remain, was recovered, and it was again reinterred. Only this time, there was no grand tomb or mausoleum. Rather, a simple marble slab would mark the resting place of William the Conqueror. And though there are still allegedly the remains of the Conqueror somewhere beneath that marble slab, the majority of him, his bones and anything else he may have been buried with, have been lost forever. These are 3 stories of lost leaders. This is the retelling. In 323 BC, Alexander the Great died in Babylon, and he was embalmed, mummified, and placed in a golden casket that was filled with honey to preserve him. Plans were then made for him to be brought back to Macedonia and laid to rest with the other kings of his country. Things didn't go as planned, however. Even in death, Alexander was a powerful symbol. Where he was laid to rest mattered. As the great king's body was being transported back to Greece, Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals and the man who got Egypt when Alexander died, hijacked the massive procession bound for Greece, and he diverted it to Egypt, having Alexander's body buried in Memphis instead, to be laid to rest alongside the pharaohs. A few years later, Alexander's remains were moved to Alexandria, where they were placed in a grand tomb. And there Alexander remained. According to the Roman historian Suetonius, both Caesar and Augustus paid their respects to Alexander, visiting his tomb during their respective time in Egypt. Augustus allegedly placed a golden crown on the mummified remains, and when he was asked if he wished to see the tombs of other kings and pharaohs, he replied, "I came to see a king, not a row of corpses." The next Roman emperor to visit Alexander's tomb was one of the worst, Caligula. The tyrannical sociopath had Alexander's tomb opened, and he allegedly stole the armor off of the dead king's corpse, later wearing it himself. Caligula was obsessed with power and great men. He wanted to be one of them, so much so that he was willing to desecrate their tombs and wear their clothes. For the next century, Alexander's tomb would remain a site of tourism and also vandalism, until it was finally sealed off by the Emperor Septimus Severus around the year 200 AD. Septimus's own son, Caracalla, was a great admirer of Alexander, and he visited the tomb in 215, though it's unknown if he actually saw the body, the coffin, or just the tomb. After that, the exact whereabouts of Alexander the Great's remains become obscured, even to the point where the location of his tomb cannot be determined. By the year 400, it was reported of Alexander's tomb, even his own people know not. Despite this, others would report later seeing or visiting Alexander's tomb, even some as late as the 17th century, though none of these accounts can be confirmed. To this day, the remains of Alexander the Great remain lost, and perhaps they will remain that way for all time. Maybe they were smashed or scattered centuries ago, or stolen away and hidden in some attic, then inherited and tossed away without a second thought. Maybe they were all stolen and sold on the ancient and medieval black market, or maybe his remains are still out there, mummified and sealed away, waiting to be discovered. Every few years, a coffin or sarcophagus is unearthed in Egypt, and the headline usually reads the same, usually prompting the question, have Alexander's remains finally been recovered? So far, the answer has always come back the same. In the year 73 BC, at a gladiatorial school in the Roman city of Capua, roughly 120 miles south of the Eternal City, a group of enslaved gladiators staged a revolt. They seized knives and spits from the kitchens, and they overwhelmed the guards before breaking out and escaping captivity. Leading the gladiators was a man called Spartacus. The Third Servile War had just begun. A year after escaping from Capua, the number of people following Spartacus had gone from around 70 to 70,000. Spartacus was a skilled tactician and military leader. The victories he won against Roman forces that pursued him inspired others to join his cause, and soon his ranks swelled with escaped slaves, gladiators, and even some former soldiers. His army was highly mobile, striking fast and moving fast, defeating the Roman forces in guerrilla-style attacks and raiding the countryside for the supplies they needed to keep them moving. Much can be said about Spartacus, and I plan to one day make a more in-depth video on him and the Third Servile War, but for the sake of this video, I'll really only be focusing on one aspect of Spartacus's amazing rebellion: the end of it. Spartacus's army had been split in half, and his co-ruler, a former gladiator called Crixus, had been defeated in battle, along with roughly 30,000 of his men. Spartacus had avenged that defeat by crushing those same Romans that had killed Crixus, but by then he found himself in a bad position, trapped at the bottom of the Italian peninsula with a massive army of angry Romans headed his way. Hoping to escape to Sicily and spark more rebellions there, Spartacus struck a deal with some Sicilian pirates, but in doing so, he unfortunately fell for one of the classic blunders. The Sicilian pirates betrayed Spartacus, and they left him and his army in Italy. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in all of Rome, was bearing down on Spartacus with 8 legions, possibly as many as 50,000 soldiers, and he was determined that this time Spartacus's highly mobile army would not escape Roman justice. As the Romans closed in on Spartacus, they built trenches and fortifications to better prevent a breakout. As Crassus and his legions closed in, Spartacus's forces lost cohesion and split into smaller groups that began to launch fruitless attacks against the Romans. Seeing his army melt away 1,000 men at a time, Spartacus gave up on maneuvering and instead launched one more final attack in an attempt to break out of Italy. In the battle that followed, Spartacus himself fought valiantly. According to the ancient historian Appian, Spartacus fought a desperate action in an attempt to reach Crassus and kill him, personally cutting down legionnaires and centurions in the chaos of battle before being wounded in the leg by a javelin. Spartacus then fell to his knees, and he disappeared in the carnage of war. His body was never found. In the end, Rome got its victory over the rebels. Though the fighting was fierce and many legionnaires were killed, the forces that made up Spartacus's army were completely routed, with many of them fleeing to the hills and countryside. Many were also captured and crucified, no fewer than 6,000 of them, their bodies and crosses lining the road from Rome to Capua as a warning to others. Rome may finally have won their victory over Spartacus, but his body and his remains were lost forever. On the 29th of May, 1453, after a siege that lasted 54 days, Constantinople, the city that had been founded by Constantine himself in the 4th century, the city at the crossroads of the world, fell to the 21-year-old Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, or Mehmed the Conqueror, and his army of over 50,000 soldiers. After weeks of desperate fighting and bitter action, the attackers gained entry to the city through a breach and overwhelmed the far outnumbered defenders. Seeing his walls overrun with the enemy, the last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, removed any royal regalia he had on, and fighting alongside his men as a common soldier, he led a last-ditch charge into the attacking waves of Ottomans. He was never seen again. The city of Constantinople fell. The defenders were slain, and the citizens of the city, some 30,000 to 50,000 civilians, were enslaved by the Ottomans during the 3-day sack of the city. It was the end of the Byzantine Empire, the very end of all that remained of the once mighty Roman Empire. The fall of Constantinople was not only the end of the Roman Empire, it has also often been seen as the end of the medieval era. The guns and gunpowder used against the walls of Constantinople heralded in a new age of warfare, one where the old systems of knights and castles was replaced with explosives and ever-evolving firearms. It was the end of an age, an end to the age of chivalry, and dying alongside that age was the Emperor Constantine XI and the soldiers who charged with him. Legends of the emperor's ultimate fate soon spread after the fall of Constantinople. Because he stripped himself of any royal regalia, his body was never identified among the thousands of soldiers slain defending the city. Rumors spread and turned to prophecy that told that the emperor had not died in the fall of the city, and that he had actually been miraculously saved by an angel, or that he actually was just asleep waiting to awaken on the day the city was retaken. Sadly for those captured and sold into slavery, the prophecy never came true, and the emperor still has yet to rise again. Until he does, his remains will be lost forever. There are hundreds more stories of lost leaders throughout history, stories of bodies disturbed or graves vandalized or intentionally hidden to ward off looters. Maybe I'll make another video about it someday. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.